Okay, well, I think we're live. Hey, I'm sorry that this is kind of like what I kind of expected. I was trying to do something where people could actually call in with an overlay and a format with OBS, but unfortunately, I can't still quite figure out how to do it where their numbers won't show. So I'm doing it this way, the old-fashioned way, just streaming directly through Zoom. If you call in, the number will not show. It only shows to us, but it doesn't show to the outside. So you have anonymity if you call in, because I wouldn't blame you for not wanting people to know that you're calling into here, especially with the people we have on here.
That's the kind of night it's going to be.
Yeah. I would have called in and talked to Nick and Ozzy. So anyways, this is going to be our second one for Ask a Philosopher. We got Nick Soutter with us. He's a prolific author and a person who owns the Human Codex, whatever that is. We still haven't figured it out. He's the one that has a $10,000 challenge to the flat earthers that still nobody's taken him up on. If you guys want information about that, we can get into that later. If he wants to do a spiel on that. We also got the awesome Ozzy Ramses II as a guest. He's going to be here making sure that we're kind of on point here. If not, he's just going to make it up as he goes along like he usually does. But anyways, welcome, guys. Anything you gotta start us off with before we have people try to call in? By the way, the link is in the video description to dial in. So if you want to call in, that's how you do it. You just if you're in San Jose area, which is on this side, you do the 408. If you're on New York side Eastern, you do the 646. Or if you want to find a specific number, you can go find your local number. But give it a shot. Call in. Ask these guys some questions. But anyways, start off, Nick. What you got for us? Anything you want to talk about before we answer some questions here?
I can't think of anything. I appreciate you. I don't know what the codex is either. Someday we'll figure that out. But it's a both a social networking site and got all our It's supposed to. It's theist friendly. The idea is it's a place where theists can come on to and just sort of see what the arguments are. The arguments are hopefully put well in a framework that everyone can understand, and it's hopefully a place for theists and atheists, and the challenge we can get into more at some point later if you'd like. But yeah, I've had a lot of people threaten to take me up on it, but they always sort of back out at the last minute, and maybe it's because I haven't showered enough. I don't know. But
I don't think a lot of people understand it, because I try to explain it to a few people and they're like, oh, well, I don't want to put up $10,000. Like, no, it doesn't work like that. And I try to give them the details, but even still, none of them are ever going to do it, because they have to still reimburse the expenses when they find out that the earth is not flat.
Well, on the off chance, I always say on the off chance it turns out that the earth isn't flat, yes, you would have to reimburse us. But other than that, the key is, especially assuming a flat earth, nobody's out of pocket anything. You don't have to give us 10,000. You don't have to put up any of your own money. No cost or risk to you, assuming the earth is flat. If it's round, you'll have to reimburse us. But presumably you believe it's flat, so it's not necessarily a huge risk to you, especially since you can take as much time as you like to come up with a good experiment, one that you are confident will do exactly what you say it will.
What about you, Ozzy? Are you still deliberating on that? I mean, you still have the jury out on the shape of the earth, or you pretty well solidified on your position?
Yeah, I settled my own concerns about that some time ago.
Now, people may not know this, but you actually were a young Earth creationist, so it's not that far of a jump to think you might have been a flat earther at one time. But
that's true. Yeah,
flat earther, right?
Yeah, I was never a flat earther, but I was a young Earth creationist. My religious upbringing was that of a Jehovah's Witness. So I was never officially a Jehovah's Witness. I was never baptized as a Jehovah's Witness, but the religious instruction of my home growing up was that. And so I was someone who didn't believe in evolution. I didn't believe in an old Earth. I actually asked my biology teacher in high school. I challenged my biology teacher on the subject of evolution and asked him, with all sincerity, thinking it was a good argument and a good objection, why are there still monkeys?
I am not kidding. I actually had somebody say that to the other day. I was kind of like looking around for some guests. I do that every so often. I'll go find hangouts late at night, and there was this one channel that was going on, and the lady there was just bashing on evolution, and that was one of the things she ran. And I'm like, man, you guys don't even know how profound your misunderstandings are. And of course, I'm in the live chat. I'm not able to explain to them phylogeny in the live chat and glidistics and basic biology, and they're calling me the idiot, and I'm like, okay, I understand this topic a little bit, at least the basics. Why don't you let me in and I'll help you guys out? But of course they wouldn't even bother. That's why I think they're all dishonest, right? why are there still monkeys?
So what got you turned around?
It's a long story, and there are sort of different versions of it that I have told, emphasizing different aspects of what led to that. But I guess the thumbnail would be this: that it wasn't that in particular that changed my mind. It sort of threw me out of religion, but that was an ingredient in it, and it was because my parents had cultivated an interest in the sciences. I was sort of always curious about the natural world. I was always one who was collecting rocks and plant identification and stuff like that. I was sort of into the natural world. I still am. My real passion is sort of camping and canoeing and winter camping and snowshoeing and that kind of stuff. I love the outdoors, and I had that in me as a young man or a boy rather, and my parents encouraged that. Jehovah's Witnesses typically don't encourage that kind of scientific inquisitiveness. They certainly don't encourage higher education. And my mother tried to discourage me from pursuing higher education, anything after high school. But they would buy me things like microscopes and chemistry sets and, that kind of stuff. And I kept reading books about astronomy. I was a backyard astronomer. I had a telescope. I did a lot of backyard astronomy, which is why I could never fall for the flat Earth, because I knew enough about patterns of celestial motion to know that was inexplicable on a flat Earth model. And in any case, it was those kinds of interests that had me rubbing up against scientific explanations that all presumed that the Earth was very, very old. And my theology told me that it wasn't very, very old, that it was very young. And so there was always this tension, always this friction. And I tried to bracket that as much as possible, but that eventually sort of came to a breaking point. And there were a few other specific things along those lines that kind of nudged me out of it. And then there were other considerations. There were moral considerations. I had, problems with the theology itself. But with respect to evolution, I had an interest in science. I loved astronomy, and you can't be interested in astronomy and stargazing, and you can't be interested in dinosaurs without constantly bumping up against the evidence for a very, very old Earth and a very, very old universe. And it happened over and over again, happened for years and years. And you can only sort of suppress that cognitive dissonance so long, I think. And it happened. And if I didn't have that interest in the natural world, then I might not have been constantly, relentlessly exposing myself to that cognitive dissonance. So I'm very grateful to my parents that they cultivated that interest in me, got me those books, got me those telescopes and microscopes and chemistry sets and all of that stuff, because it really helped me sort of break free from that preposterous worldview.
Genetically Modified Atheist put on his channel his deconversion story. I'm a big fan of deconversion stories, and we actually put those up on the Codex to help give people who are struggling with it, look, here are people who've succeeded and have worked through it, because I think it can be very difficult. But I really like his. I don't know if you know who Genetically Modified Atheist is?
You mean Genetically Modified Skeptic?
Oh, Skeptic. Oh, well, so
yeah,
I don't even know who he is.
What's in a name? And a rose by name would be sweet.
Yeah, yes, I know who he is. I don't know his story though.
Yeah, he put it up on the. I can link you to it. It's a great story. It's a reasonably similar one. Came from an evangelical background, and started out in astronomy, and was just saying, "No, you guys are wrong." And finally, it's like, "No, there are too many things that point independently to 14 billion light year." 14 billion year lifespan of the universe. And so I said, okay, so clearly that one's, I'll give science that one, but nothing else. And it took him years before each of his other preconceptions failed. And then finally they did. And it sounds like he's also, of course, had difficulty with his family as a result, which I think is a common problem, obviously. But
yeah, I think it's a domino type effect. And some people, it's like step by step, like when Wayne left Young Earth Creationism, his first domino was realizing that he had been lied to about macroevolution, because he was adamant that it never existed, that we've never observed it. And, he bought into the whole narrative hook, line, and sinker. He was a full-on Young Earth Creationist. And then when we debated and he went to go validate my sources to kind of try to debunk me, and then found out that they were debunkable in that way, he left, and he was done. But he's still, you know, a Christian. So, you know, my goal is not to actually change people's theology. I don't care whether they're theist or atheist or whatever. But, you know, we do know certain things that are demonstrably untrue, such as young earth creationism. So if somebody leaves that, then I feel like that's mission accomplished on my end. Anything beyond that, I leave for other people if they want to change their positions, theologically speaking. It's not that's not my shtick, right? It's not my end goal to do that. I don't have the wherewithal to sit there and try to convince people whether God exists or God doesn't exist. I don't really care one way or another, to be honest with you.
I think that's an interesting point, because I've actually heard, I think each of you say something similar in a different way. You know, I'm an anti-theist, but for the most part, I'm not sure there's anything specifically about theistic religions that is the problem. It's their lack of critical thinking, or the lack of critical thinking you usually find associated with it. It's a stretch to say that if you could snap your fingers to a Thanos and get rid of religion, that the people who were prone to dogmatic thinking, that would actually have any change in them, and that suddenly, you know, embrace science anymore. It seems to me like everybody here is sort of on board with the fact that one of the fundamental problems is dogmatism. It challenges science, challenges global warming, challenges, you know, things that really make life better. But I think you guys are differentiating that it's not necessarily, of course, religion that does this. I think a lot of anti-theists can miss the forest for the trees and start attacking religion for the sake of attacking religion, and not remembering that it's not really religion that's the problem. At least that's my, I don't know if we're going to get in a caller who wants to disagree with that, and I don't know if I don't mean to be putting words in your mouth if I'm misrepresenting the position of either of the two of you.
No, I'm good. I mean, look, I've seen it firsthand. You don't automatically become a critical thinker when you change your theological position to anything. I mean, if you, let's say we wake up one day and you say, hey, you know what? I think all gods are bullshit. You might be just as dogmatic on other things. You might be just as lack of critical thinking on many other positions. I see a lot of atheists all the time that are just as dogmatically wrong as creationists. I mean, to the point of absurdity. I literally had a guy today. He was asking me for some sourcing, and I gave him a ton of papers, all of which I have read. And he said, well, you're not demonstrating anything. I'm like, then what is your understanding of demonstration? I'm like, you know, if you were asking for evidence that supports somebody's position and I provided to you, and then you're saying that I'm not giving you anything, then at this point, you're just being dogmatically ridiculous, like somebody's trying to show that a flat earther, that the earth is round. I mean, there's really no difference, because I was sitting there just stunned and mortified going, do you understand that I've quoted you like literally a dozen PhDs that are atheists that have written these papers? It's not just, you know, theists, because sometimes there's this narrative, oh, well, there's theist influence that are taking over the philosophical dominion of universities and warping the minds of students. But no, these are, you know, well-recognized atheist philosophers, and they say, well, you know, you're not really giving me any evidence. And it's like, I don't know what you mean by evidence at this point. Ozzy, I think you've seen it a few times as well.
Oh yeah, I've seen plenty of that. If I could touch on what Nick was talking about earlier with respect to, you know, what's the enemy here as I see it. It isn't religion per se. It certainly isn't theism per se. It's irrationality, superstition, and dogmatism that are our opponents here. And there's plenty of people out there who are not religious, who are in the grips of a superstition and irrationality, you know, bad epistemic norms, and dogmatism. Yeah, and you don't have to be religious to be in the grips of that. And there's plenty of other non-religious forms of dogmatism. You know, there's all kinds of political dogmas, for instance, that we could be in the grips of. So I've sort of never been an advocate for atheism per se, although there's a certain sense in which I fit that mold. But I see myself as sort of an advocate for skepticism, critical thinking, rationality, and scientific values. That's sort of what I try to promote, not atheism per se. Although I do think that on balance, religions are a bad thing. They're a net bad, and I think the world would be well rid of them. But that doesn't mean I would press a button, you know, or snap my fingers Thanos like and just make religions disappear. I wouldn't sort of, you know, rob people of opportunities to change their mind. I would want people to change their minds on a rational basis. I would never want to compel anybody to stop believing. And there's another little tweak on this, and that is that I don't think theism is responsible for any atrocities. I did a video on my YouTube channel years ago called, I think it was called Theism, Atheism, and Moral Atrocities. And a lot of atheists will sort of say, hey, look at all the atrocities that have been done in the name of religion. And I think there's plenty of religions that are responsible for moral atrocities. But that's not the same thing as theism. The mere belief in a God doesn't result in anybody killing anybody, executing anybody, converting people by the sword and stuff like that. All these sort of moral atrocities that we associate with religions are not the product of theism itself. Theism is just the belief that there's a God, some kind of creative intelligence, right? But that is not enough to motivate you to kill people. You have to believe in a whole lot of other preposterous doctrines. And it's the same thing with atheism. A lot of theists will say, oh, look how many people died at the hands of atheism. Well, it's true that an awful lot of people died at the hands of atheists, but atheism isn't enough to motivate you to murder people. They'll point to Marxist regimes, Soviet Russia, the
League of Militant
atrocities. The atrocities of Stalin and Pol Pot and Chairman Mao and that sort of thing. And that's not just atheism. Those are huge political dogmas. You have to believe a whole lot more than just there isn't a God, or there is a God, before you'll be animated, motivated to start executing people. So I don't actually even try to talk people out of their God beliefs. I do try to talk people out of dogmatism, though, where possible.
Here's a good question, actually, now that I think about it. So, and I've bumped into this repeatedly, which is because there seem to be two views, and that I can tell it's based on sort of a British view versus an American view, but it can't be just that. But when I looked up in a British philosophical dictionaries, I got one thing, and I got something else in American ones, and you'd think that wouldn't happen, but that's what I got, which is and the American ones fortunately allowed for the other view, but is deism a subset of theism, or is theism a subset of deism? Now, I subscribe to the latter. So I say there's deism, which is the belief in a higher power of some kind, and as a subset of that is theism. That is not just a belief in a higher power, but you add to that a belief in specific commandments, injunctions, personal relationship, or whatever else you have. But there's the other view, which is that theism is just a belief in a specific God, and then deism as a subset of that. And how do you guys see it?
Do you want to go first? Plus, we have a caller rating, so
okay.
I'm going to ask.
Shouldn't take too long.
Keep it brief, Ozzy. And by the way, keeping it brief for Ozzy is like under 30 minutes for respect.
Yeah. Okay. I can keep this brief. I see it differently, actually. I understand theism in two possible ways. The belief in any kind of God makes you a theist. So that would be theism. That would be one way. That's the very broad, inclusive definition. But in theological circles, they recognize that theism, they distinguish it from deism, just as people who regard themselves as deists distinguish themselves from theists. A theistic God is a kind of God that usually has a personality, is concerned with human affairs, and so forth, right? Is involved in human affairs. But a deistic creator is not like that. And most of the people that I've known who are deists, in fact, everyone I've ever known who is a deist, affirms that deism is a doctrine that there is a God, there is a creator God, and that this creator God can be apprehended through reason and looking at the book of nature, right? You don't need a book written by a god or inspired by a god or written by people allegedly inspired by gods. You don't need any of that. So deists are people who believe there is a creator God of some sort. It may or may not be concerned with human affairs. But that God is rationally inferable by looking at the facts of the world. So they would use, cosmological arguments, teleological arguments, and things like that. Those would be the kinds of arguments that they would use. They think that they're contrasting their concept of religion. They don't even consider it a religion; they consider it a philosophical position. They're contrasting it with a religious position that posits a God that has to be revealed directly or through some supernatural means or something other than mere looking at the world and doing science. And so deists of that flavor do not regard themselves as theists. They think that they worship a different kind of thing, and the way you come to know about that thing is completely different. And so they repudiate theism. So, and this is a view that is not just propounded by theists. This is a distinction that you will hear in theological circles, that is theologians, religious theologians, like for instance Christians, they'll say, look, we're theists. Theists believe in a certain kind of God, personal God, an interventionist God, who manifests himself in the world, and is not a mere creator who's uninterested in human affairs. Right? So their God has a personality.
I would make, let me show you how to do it succinctly, I guess. I would just say this, in classical theism, then deist would not be considered theist. A non-classical theism, deism would be considered under theism. The way, I mean, other than that, I just think theism is any proposition that a God exists. But if you want to look at the more epistemic differences, then yes, then a theist would be a belief in a God that's more personalized and involved in people's lives, and a deist position wouldn't. But when we're talking about, for all practical purposes, when we're talking about theism, it's just the belief of any God. But when you start getting into the nuances of classical theism versus non-classical theism, then yeah, matter of fact, to a classical theist, deism would fall under atheism. I had this discussion with Dr. Kenny Rhodes, and he is a classical theist. He actually considers deists to be atheistic, or even atheist in his schema. So.
Yeah, do you want to know how much hate I get on Twitter when I say don't dare say that on Twitter?
No, and again, it's his schema. And his schema, then it's no different than the Christians being atheist when they didn't worship the Roman pantheon of gods, right? So, I mean, the word is used polysemously, so there's different uses for it. As long as you understand the use that is being used by the word, I guess it's a tautology there, then it makes no difference to me how the word is used, as long as I understand your context. So if you say that a deist would be an atheist to a theist, under the paradigm of classical theism, I have no issue with that. I don't know if Ozzy would, but I don't. Do you? Because that's how Kenny Rhodes would do it. But anyways, we got a caller real quick. Unless you want to add anything on that, Ozzy, you good? You want to take another 20 minutes?
No, sorry. I was having a hard time with the mute button here for some reason.
No worries. All right, caller. Who do we got?
This is Brian G.
Brian G. Well, we know who you were, Brian G.
Well, yeah. I mean, the annoying machine noise should have given it all away.
Yeah, that's why I muted you, because I heard your background noise.
No. Thank you for muting me. I know how annoying it is. When I called in, I couldn't find a mute button. I'm like, shit, they're going to hear the machine. I
can take care of it on this end. So what do you got for us? What's your question that you've been burning to ask Ozzy?
Well, okay, so I'm a I got a few laughs with this, but I call myself a trans atheist. I'm trying to transition from new atheism to a philosophical sound position.
Fair enough.
So, okay, so I guess my thing is, as far as having a philosophically sound position, so if being an atheist, that requires a burden of proof or a burden of justification for disbelief in a god or gods. I guess my question is, what are some good sources to point me to? I mean, I don't expect a easy snap answer and, okay, I'll go with that. I kind of want to reason through it and actually get an understanding of my position.
I think that there's something wrong with the way you're approaching this. It's commendable to want to have good reasons for your disbelief, right? Your incredulity here. But I mean, really, you sort of need to ask yourself, why is it the case that you don't believe, or that you find it incredible, as I do, right? And you don't have to go and hunt for them. I mean, so there's plenty of books on atheism and arguments for atheism out there. In fact, Stephen Cray, you had on, I think it was on your Facebook page, on your own Facebook page, a list of arguments that you want to sort of visit at some point that are arguments, positive arguments for atheism. But I mean, if you already think, there's no God, you have to ask yourself why you think that. So I mean, before you even go hunting for arguments to support what you already believe, ask yourself, why do you believe what you do? Surely you have reasons, right? So I think if you go out hunting, looking for reasons, what will happen is one of two things. You will either encounter arguments and you go, yeah, that makes sense. That's sort of what I've been thinking. That will be great. You'll find a better articulation of your own reasons, perhaps. But another thing that might happen is, without ever really considering your own actual reasons and whether or not they are any good, you will encounter other reasons for thinking that there isn't a God. And you might end up sort of brainwashing yourself into supporting a position that you already believe in. So I always recommend to atheists who feel a responsibility to discharge their burden of justification, but first of all, introspect and ask yourself, what sets off your bullshit detectors? Because I think that's what typically goes on, right? You sense that there's something wrong with this story, with this claim, and ask yourself, and why do you think it's false? Just articulate it to yourself. So, put it down on paper. Right? It's amazing how writing will help, actually. Or argue it out with a friend who has a sympathetic ear. But don't immediately consult what you think will be the best arguments, because you might, in fact, just be engaging in confirmation bias and finding arguments in support of a conclusion you already hold. The first thing I would recommend is examine whether or not the reasons you already possess are reasonable by your own lights, right? And try to assess those first. And then there's just tons of books. I mean, you can start with something like Bertrand Russell's "Why I'm Not a Christian" or something like that. And there's all kinds of books on the subject of atheism. And of course, the corpus of philosophy is full of arguments for that. There are arguments for naturalism. And of course, if you're a naturalist, then chances are you're going to be an atheist unless you believe in a wholly naturalistic God. So, I mean, there are avenues that you can take, but I would recommend, before you actually do any research here, just mine your own intuitions and what you think the reasons are for why you feel incredulous with respect to the claim that a God exists.
Nick?
I couldn't agree more. I think it also is a little, you just got to be careful, sort of, even the way you phrased it, which was, how do I look for justifications for what I believe? That's, right. That's essentially what you just said. And I think you want to try avoid thinking that way, figure out what you believe and why first, which is all Ozzy was saying. But let me ask you this. So a second ago, if I understood correctly, you used to believe that atheists did not have a burden of proof. Is that correct? Now you've transitioned to, now you think they do? Because if I guess what I would say is, because I don't know if he's muted or if he's can answer, but
no, he's still there. Oh,
okay. So was there a time when you felt that atheists didn't have the burden of proof?
Let me unmute real quick. Go ahead, Ryan. Sorry, just coming back to the noise.
No, that's okay. Okay, so basically, just to give you a background, I used to be a fundamentalist independent Baptist, King James only. So I can give you many reasons why I am atheistic towards the Christian God. Okay, that's local from what I've gathered so far. Now, if you're going to go to a philosophical idea of God, that to me is much harder to combat, because that could be any God. That's just a generic God concept. So I am definitely atheistic towards the Abrahamic God. And when I first came out of fundamentalism, New Atheism is what I saw. That's what I found. I gravitated towards the Seth Andrews podcast, Thinking Atheist. I got a hold of the Aaron Ra's Foundational Falsehoods of Christianity. I also got a hold of the Atheist Experience. So basically, what I've heard so far is atheism is just the default position. We don't believe until we're presented with evidence that satisfies our whatever. So I guess I'm trying to gravitate towards the just simply lacking a belief dictionary definition of atheism to a what's the word I'm looking for? A more logically sound philosophical position.
Well, you just answered the question, though. You just answered your own question, because if you can justify why you think the lack of belief is an acceptable view, then in order to justify that on some level, you need to. It's roughly the same justification you're going to use for a more positive atheism, where you say, well, I've looked at these other religions and none of them are any more compelling than Christianity. You've just justified it. You've just given a reason as to why you do not have the belief, or you believe that there are no gods. And you may need to go an extra step further, but you're 80 to 90% of the way there. Does that make sense?
Can I flesh this out a bit?
Real quick, Brian. He asked you, but I don't think I heard you answer that. You didn't before think they had a burden of proof. Now you think that atheists do have a burden of proof, and regardless of whether you are a positive atheist or a negative atheist, whether you affirm it in the positive case or you just don't have a God belief, you think now you agree with most people that are arguing for this, that all positions have
yes.
kind of burden of proof, right? Have you changed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, because I mean, if you present me with an idea and I say, well, okay, I don't believe it. Well, basically what you've shown is, okay, well, the person you're talking with really has no onus to continue a conversation with you. I mean, if you just simply say, well, I don't believe it, well, can you give a reason why you don't believe it?
Yeah.
You know, if
No.
a flat earther comes to
No.
me and says, go ahead.
So could I address a point that?
Yes.
Okay, Brian, I think could maybe sharpen up the reason that you put forward here with respect to justifying global atheism. That is, thinking that no gods exist, right? And you as Nick said, you're 80 or 90% of the way there. It's sometimes just a matter of articulating it a certain way. So,
right.
Let's consider what I think is an analogous case. Consider the case of Bigfoot. Someone comes along and says, "Hey, Ozzy, what do you think of Bigfoot?" Right? Now, I'm going to tell you, I think Bigfoot doesn't exist. Now, I can't demonstrate the impossibility of Bigfoot. Right? The reason I believe Bigfoot doesn't exist is not because I have a demonstration of the absolute impossibility of Bigfoot. There is, of course, the lack of evidence for Bigfoot, but it's not just that. It's that this creature Bigfoot is the evidence is missing where we would expect to find it. And it's worse than that. This creature Bigfoot belongs to a class of entities, things like the Loch Ness Monster and the Abominable Snowman and Chupacabra and all kinds of other critters and dragons and sea serpents and stuff like that, none of which have been shown to exist. And I realized, wait a minute, that Bigfoot just sounds like one of those. Right? That's not begging the question to observe that an entity that is being put forward for your consideration resembles another class of entities. Okay. Now, how does a god, like a deistic god, for instance, which is a much more rarefied god, how does that resemble Yahweh, for instance? Well, it resembles Yahweh in the following respect. Everything that is said about a deistic god, or the Olympian gods, or Yahweh, or any other god, everything that we know, everything that is said about such gods is stipulated. It is merely declared. It is not discovered. It is all stipulation. There's no demonstration there, right? They all smell of fiction, just like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and so forth. It's not that these things are all impossibilities and self-contradictory. They're not all self-contradictory impossibilities. But we know a couple of facts. These things, there's no there. There's no facts in hand. There's no demonstration of any of the attributes of these beings that are being put forward. All of their attributes are merely stipulated. We have not discovered these attributes even exist, much less that they exist, that they inhere in this particular being that's being put forward for your consideration. So any God that's put on the table, that's put before me, immediately starts off with a lower prior probability from me, a very low prior probability, an extremely low probability. So low that I'm going to think, oh, I'm going to conclude it doesn't exist. And it's because it belongs to a certain class of entities, right? It smells like BS. And that's why I say your BS detectors go off when you hear this. It isn't simply that you haven't been presented with evidence, because you could present, I mean, someone could come up to me and say, hey, Ozzy, they discovered a new species of spider in the Amazon. And my bullshit detectors do not go off. Right? Well, why don't they go off? Because I know that spiders exist. I know because spiders belong to a class of entities for which I have reason to think that they exist. And the facts that are put forward, or rather the properties of spiders, are not merely stipulated. They're not things like omniscience, omnipresence, aseity, omnipotence, and all these attributes that we hear about gods, right? They're actual properties that we know exist, that have been discovered to exist, right? Nothing that's said about a god is like anything that we would say about a spider, right? I mean, even Bigfoot stands a much better chance, as I see it, of existing than any god that has been put forward. So there's a reason for my BS detectors going off, a perfectly rational and defensible reason for my BS detectors going off. My doubt, my incredulity with respect to the existence of any god, I think is warranted. It's even warranted in one other way. Consider all of the creatures that have ever been put forward by humans, right? The Sphinx, manticores, unicorns, Pegasus, gods, fairies, pixies, Bigfoot, sea monsters. It goes on and on and on. There's something that we know about human beings. We manufacture entities. We cobble together these things. We like to tell these things, and these ideas persist for millennia. There are people to this day who still believe in literal witches who are casting spells and consorting with the devil, right? There are people in the United States in their thousands who believe in literal pagan witchcrafts who can cast spells. There are people who call themselves witches who think that they can cast spells and ensorcel people, right? So we know something about human psychology. We know the kinds of critters that we are and the kinds of things that we get up to. And one of the kinds of things that we get up to is making up fantastical entities on the basis of no evidence whatsoever, with properties that are not to be found anywhere. And that is yet another reason for my BS detectors ringing off the hook as soon as someone proposes a god, even a very vague, anemic, thin, rarefied god like a deistic god.
Now, Brian, do you notice something? When what he did was he discharged his burden of proof just by now. When an atheist says something along the lines of all gods are bullshit, that's not a burden. I mean, that has a burden of proof attached to it, but that's not discharging it, right? Why you think that all gods are bullshit? That's the reason. That's your discharging of your burden of justification. That's what he just did. That he gave his reasons why either he believes that it's bullshit or why he doesn't believe at all. Because any position has some kind of burden of reasons why you either you accept a proposition, you disbelieve the proposition, you don't sustain it, you don't affirm it, you withhold assent, whatever it is your position is, you got to have reasons for it, right? I mean, it's kind of nonsensical to say, well, I'm not going to believe you. And then when you ask somebody, well, why don't you believe me? And they say, well, I just don't. I have no rational reasons for it. That makes no sense. You have to have rational reasons why you have any kind of leaning one way or another, or whatever it is your position is. I think you have to. Now, I don't think you have to tell somebody if you don't want to. If you don't have a conversation with somebody, that's fine. But I think if you're having a discussion, like here we're having a discussion, I think you have a dialectical duty to give somebody reasons. If Nick told me that, hey, Steve, I went out and bought a cat yesterday, and I said, hey, well, Nick, I don't believe you. And he's like, well, Steve, why don't you believe me? And I'm just like, well, I just don't want to tell you. He's probably gonna think I'm an asshole, right? Because we're not having a terrible conversation at that point, right?
Can I ask Brian a quick question?
Yes, and then we got to get to the next caller.
Yeah, this is very quick. You can answer with a yes or no if you like, but I'm just curious. What I said there as sort of giving my reason for why I think no gods exist. Does that ring true to you? Does that line up sort of with your thinking, or am I sort of off base there? I'm curious.
No. I mean, it was articulated very well, and I would like to get to the position to where I can articulate that in a coherent manner. That's what I'm working on, and I'm in way too many debate groups. I'm in way too many debate groups to not have reasons why I don't believe for this or that. It's not, you know. So that's what I need to get to is a very coherent, reasoned argument for why I do not believe gods are true.
Yeah, just remember you don't have to falsify every god to hold a probabilistic view that all gods don't exist. I mean, I'm compiling a list of arguments, and some of them are pretty good. I mean, I have a few particular favorites that I particularly like the divine hiddenness. I think is a really good argument. Even problem of evil is really good. But you can say, look, I've heard all these dozens of arguments about why there's no gods, and as Ozzy said, they sound fantastic, right? They're just these beings that we discover their properties. We never discovered them a posteriori. They've always been told to us, prescribed to us a priori. This is what this God's attributes is. We don't go out finding the attributes of a deity. And you can make an argument that say, hey, look at it's overall the case is probably more likely. But I think what happens is people don't want to be wrong. And so they have this narrative, well, if I can't be sure, if I can't be certain there's no gods, I can't make the claim no gods exist. And I think that's absolutely wrong. You can make that claim there's no gods exist. You just have to be able to justify it why you hold that position. You only have to demonstrate that no gods exist if you say, hey, look, I can literally prove there are no gods. Good luck with that. That's a hell of an onus. That's a hell of a thing that you're claiming. And then you actually have to you actually prove that. You have to actually prove that. That I don't think can be done in my ontology, but I think it's a very high burden. Yeah, I don't think anybody even here would say they could actually literally prove that every single God does not exist. I think that would be almost an impossible challenge. But when somebody does do it, I've had people tell me that. I'm like, go for it. And you know how many people have actually even tried to even give a proof? Bumpkiss. So
right. And just real quick, a couple of weeks ago, I had a very internal critique, and I came to the realization that the closest you'll ever get me to belief in a God is the deist position, but there's just no way I could
but
ever
isn't that
get
a rarefied
past
God? I mean, I don't care much for the deistic type position because it's so rarefied to the point of why even bother with it.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, there are arguments to be made for a prime mover, a prime first cause,
yeah, that's different.
Whatever.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yes. Oh, that's different from deism?
Yeah, because I mean, you can have a prime mover that's still a theistic type being. I mean, the Christian God is a prime mover. It's an uncaused cause, so he's not.
Well, no. Yeah. I guess basically, I'm saying an unknown prime mover. We don't know who or what it is.
A placeholder that you're going to call a deity.
Exactly.
Yeah, metaphysical necessity or contingent brute fact or something that exists. It could be an infinite regress too, but I pick one. I mean, you can argue one of three different things. I mean, I think there's probably a metaphysical necessity, but what that is, I have no idea. But anyways, all right, Brian, does that help? Because we're going to move on to the next caller.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Ozzy, and thank you, Steve, very much. I enjoyed this.
Awesome. Thank you, buddy. All right, next caller. Who we got?
Hello?
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, hey, how you doing? This is Duke.
Duke. Did you guys remember Duke?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember Duke.
Okay. I had a discussion with Duke. Yes, on the modern day debate.
Yes, we had a debate a little while back, which culminated from like a year of constantly going back and forth. And it was nice to have some sort of a cordial conversation for the first half and a non-cordial conversation and a continued non-cordial conversation over Twitter after that. But I guess if this show is just about asking a question, I think I'd like to ask Ozzy a question. Basically, if you have two people who have the exact same position, but one person prefers to be called something different than the other person does, then how do the two people go about figuring out a way to come to an agreement on what someone should be called? For example, me and Steve have the exact same position on whether or not God exists or not. I prefer to be called an atheist. I go by the dictionary definition. Steve goes by the philosophical definition. So we have the same position, but we refuse to be called the same, but we refuse to use the same term for Steve. So how would you think is the best way to go about this, Ozzy?
Well, I like to call people by the terms that they like to be called. But that doesn't mean that the other person is correct. So I can say, okay, look, you want to be called this? I'll call you whatever you want. If you want to be called an agnostic theist or an agnostic atheist, or you want to call yourself an agnostic or an atheist, I'll usually say fine. But I'll usually say, I want you to understand, I think that is not a good usage. I think it's a usage that generates confusion, and I'll tell you why. But usually I'll just, for the sake of expediency, I will do it. But I mean, a definition is a definition. There aren't right and wrong definitions. They're just definitions that are more or less useful.
I have a question, because Duke and I have spoken a bit about this, and I'm interested in chatting more about it, but I'm not entirely sure the two of you have the same. It looks like
I don't think so either, but
it looks like it's the same. So let me ask the Duke a question. If I were to say the following, and I'm going to put some words in Ozzy's mouth, and we'll see how he feels about that. If I were to say that Ozzy thinks that the color 9 smells like roses, I disagree. I say that the color 9 smells like vanilla. That's what the color 9 smells like. He and I have two different positions on this. Now, Steve is going to look at us and say, there is no way to parse this such that there is an answer. You cannot get a smell of the color 9. So is he saying that it doesn't have a smell? Or actually, perhaps that would have been a better way to frame it. So Ozzy thinks that the color 9 smells like roses. I think the color 9 doesn't have a smell. Now, if Steve says, I can't answer that question, that is a nonsensical, you can't frame things they're incommensurate. You cannot frame one in terms of the other. Would that make him closer to my position, closer to Ozzy's position, or a third position?
Did you articulate the third position, or is that an option that I can bring up?
Well, the third position in my mind would be saying that they're incommensurate and you cannot answer that question, and you cannot answer the color 9 in terms of smell. Cannot be done. So Ozzy says, yes, it has a smell. I say, no, it has no smell. And Steve says, you cannot answer one in terms of another. That's like saying, how much do you weigh in inches?
So I guess I'll be the fourth box in this video I'm watching, and I'll say,
I love fourth boxes.
I guess I'll say, I can't decide who's right or wrong, or if I agree with Steve, because it's possible that Ozzy or the two people who are discussing this, whether or not the 9 smells like roses or not, are probably speaking two different languages. And if I understood their languages, maybe I can make sense of it all. I think that more reflects the situation that me and Steve had. We were speaking two completely different languages and acting as if we understood what the other person was saying.
Well, here's the thing. I do understand what you're saying. I understand your lingo.
Here we go again. I'm not arguing about that.
Well,
all I'm saying is I'm responding to Nick.
Well, hang on. You made a statement. Let me clarify. I do understand colloquial speak. I've been doing this a very long time. The thing is, I want people to understand the philosophical lingo, right? You do recognize that the terminology that I use, I'm consistent and with the literature, right? I am an agnostic with respect to the actual literature. You agree with that?
And that's the 5th time you've asked me this question, and I've confirmed it 5 times before.
Then why would you not call me the position that I'm literally, you just said this is what it is in philosophy, but I'm going to call you something else.
Okay, that's a fair and good question. So for a second, so it seems to me that he does understand. He hasn't actually stated it, but I suspect that he understands the philosophical definition. So if he wants to be called and this is the question you called about. So he wants to be called by the philosophical definition, which is in my mind a perfectly reasonable and justifiable position. So what would you personally do in that case if you're speaking with someone who is in Steve's position?
I would ask why there would be a stigma towards going towards the word if you understand my language that I'm using.
What if he doesn't want to? Okay, yep. Sorry.
So, okay, so what I'm trying to say is because I see Steve as someone who holds the same position, and I'm calling him what I call myself. This is not the case where I feel he is something different, so I'm calling him something. I identify as an atheist. So I am seeing him as an atheist under my definition, under the dictionary definition, and he seems to be saying, no, I'm not, as opposed to saying, well, I don't like being called that. And if it's the case that he doesn't like it, then I would ask, why do you not like this definition and why does it not work? Unfortunately, it never really came to pass to answering that question.
Well, I can think of reasons. I can think of reasons why, and that is if you think that the definition that you're putting forward is vague. If I understand correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Duke, but your view of atheism is that atheism consists of merely lacking belief, right? And so you're someone who's undecided on the question, right? So I think that there aren't any gods. So I'm an atheist in sort of a very traditional, narrow sense. But someone like Steve, who's undecided on the question, he also lacks belief, but you view him as an atheist, right? But these terms exist in part to distinguish these various positions. And so as he sees it, look, when you call him an agnostic, you're subsuming him in a group with people who are like me, who think there aren't any gods. And that just sows confusion.
You mean when he calls me an atheist, not when he calls me an agnostic?
Yeah, I beg your pardon. Yes, when he calls Steve, who is an agnostic, an atheist, right? Because you think Duke, you think that an agnostic is an atheist, right? But it's a perfectly good objection.
No.
Listen, I'd rather you don't call me an atheist if I'm an agnostic, because I don't think an agnostic is an atheist. I think that they're completely different. And you think no, one belongs under the heading of the other, right? I don't think that there's anything wrong with him objecting to that.
Okay, that's very fair. So he prefers to be called one thing. I prefer to be called another. So now we're having a discussion on which group or which person is using the word better or more accurately.
Well, before we get to that, so it sounds like we have an agreement thus far then that he could it sounds like it sounds like we're agreed thus far, and now we're going to transition to the next question. But I want to make sure so we don't regress back to what we just answered in 2 minutes, which I have a suspicion we're going to slide back. But it sounds like we're all in agreement thus far.
We are in agreement that he prefers to be called something. I still don't agree with him.
Okay, but Ozzy gave a reason that I think makes a lot of sense, which is that by your definition, it would imply things that he does not want to have implied about himself, and that's legitimate. I think that's a legit claim and concern. So, and I'm not saying then, I'm not making a judgment that you necessarily still have to. Maybe you can, I'm not saying one is better than the other, and I think that's a perfect place to transition to. But just that what Ozzy said, because I think he put it perfectly, which is your definition implies things about him that he feels are not true and doesn't want to have implied. You may or may not.
And that, yeah.
But
that's what I'd like to.
Okay, yeah.
Well, okay, so the next question would be, what is it implying? Because that's what I do not understand. What is my definition implying about him that is not true?
It implies that he shares a belief with me. I'm an atheist, and I think that there aren't any gods, right? And so anyone who is familiar with the idea that an atheist is someone who thinks there aren't any gods is going to think of Steve, who doesn't hold that view, that he also holds the view that there aren't any gods, which is not his view. So he's right to ask yourself, why do so many people who self-identify as agnostics balk and resist and take umbrage when people in the atheist movement insist on calling them atheists? There's a reason why. They say, listen, I don't hold the same position as you.
I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. I'm a little bit confused. One thing I want to make clear. Is it possible that me and Steve have the exact same position?
I don't think so. I think
Steve says that he doesn't think so.
Just for clarification, so we have it on thing. Ozzy believes there's no gods. Nick believes there's no gods. Do you hold the belief there's no gods?
I do hold the belief that there are no gods.
Okay, so you three are in the same group. I'm not in your guys' group. So that's the difference. That's exactly it. I'm distinguishing myself from you three. And when you say
right, that's fine. That's wonderful. That's wonderful, Steve. That's wonderful, Steve. However, just because that's my position doesn't mean it defines what I mean by atheist. A person cannot believe and not believe there are no gods.
That's true.
Do you understand what I mean? Like, there are more people who fit under that umbrella. So the thing is, just because I believe there are no gods, I hold the definition to mean does not hold to be true that there are no gods. Steve, do you hold the position that you do not hold to be true a God exists?
I do not believe in a God, which makes me a non-theist. Doesn't make me an atheist.
Yeah, all four of us in this room are non-theists.
And so I've been having this conversation with
Duke. This is what I think you keep missing. You don't get to make the rules for other people.
I'm not saying I make the rules. I'm really not saying I make the rules.
Your terminology you can use for yourself. Nobody's ever said you're not an atheist by your definitions. Nobody's ever said you can't use the terminological approaches you want to use, right? Nobody's been arguing that, never, right? You cannot honestly use your imprecise terminology and apply it to other people and expect them not to balk at it. I don't know why you think that's appropriate. I have a distinction.
Because you asked my position. Now you asked my position and you asked me, do I believe no gods exist? You did not ask me what I think atheist means. Atheist means I do not hold to be true that a God exists. If you hold that same position, then you fit my definition. Now, how you prefer to be called?
I don't accept your definition. Don't say that. Just because
no. I'm not saying accept my definition. I said the position. Do you hold that position?
Wait, hang on a
we're all non-believers. Yes.
Yeah.
Then under my dictionary, I'm not trying to call you what you don't want to be called, but under my dictionary, you fit that position. Is that correct?
Yes. I am an atheist in your definition. I have said that for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years.
No, you haven't. But you haven't said it. You haven't said it once in our debate.
You said it now.
I have said this so many times. I don't even know how to.
Okay, fine. Wonderful.
To grasp how you don't think that I
That's
fully
wonderful.
recognize it under
because it seemed.
Please don't talk over me.
It seemed to me you had some sort of a stigma towards the word.
Listen
itself.
to me very carefully. I have never said under your definitions I'm not atheist. I've never said that. I've never argued that. I have said since the entire time I've been doing these things, I'm an atheist under sensu lato or colloquial definitions. I reject those definitions as semantics. That is like saying
maybe that was a tweet that wasn't towards me. That wasn't in our conversation. Maybe that was a tweet in some other conversation.
Stop interrupting me.
Let him finish. Let Steve finish.
You could argue that anybody who doesn't believe in a God, I'm going to call a dog. And under that definition, I'm a dog. These are semantic games, right? But I don't accept bad definitions. You have a bad definition. You have a very loose, vague, imprecise definition. I don't accept. But you could say under my definition, if you don't believe in God, you're a camel. Okay, great. I'm a camel under your definition. That's just basic reasoning. Doesn't mean that I accept your definitions. Does that make sense?
Wonderful, Steve.
Semantics.
Now, wonderful, Steve. I get it. I've always gotten it, and it seemed like you couldn't get what I was saying before.
I think I get it pretty well. I've never had any other position.
Well, that's wonderful. You didn't do it before, but I'm glad other people were able to see the debate that was happening. And look, I'm not trying to talk over you. I really don't. I really don't want to talk over you.
We made some significant progress. It sounds like you're feeling better because he has now said something. Whether he said it before or not, I don't think it's. I mean, we're on this show right now in the present. He has said it numerous times. So he has said that. So what's your next question from there?
My next question is
definition.
Yeah. My next question is, what makes my usage crappy? Hello?
I can take a stab at that.
Yeah, I could spend an hour on that one, but I was hoping Ozzy would go.
For starters, the term. For starters,
and I'm really sorry, Ozzy. I'm really sorry, Ozzy. I have to go because I actually do have to work at 6 on the dot, so I got to go. But I am going to rewatch this. I'm going to hang up and I'm going to rewatch this video when I have time, and I'd love to hear what you have to say, Ozzy. And thank you, Nick, for the conversation that we had. And
my pleasure.
you take care, Steve. Bye.
All right, now that he's gone, let's all just start talking smack about
You
him.
know, it's so funny
No,
because
I'll
I
do
mean,
that.
Ozzy's known me a long while. I've always said under a crappy definition, I would be an atheist under a crappy definition. That's why I don't accept crappy definitions. I don't know why this is so complicated. Anybody can make a definition. A definition doesn't prescribe anything either. It just describes usage. So I think people have it backwards. They read a dictionary, right? And look at the dictionary, and they see the word and they see the descriptor and they go, oh, if I have this property of the descriptor, I must be this word. And I don't think it works that way. I think it's just the opposite. I'm using, you basically say, I call myself this, and it's basically used this way. But if you have these properties, it doesn't necessarily make you this. If I have a lack of belief, it doesn't necessarily make me an atheist by necessity. There's no metaphysical necessity that says, well, if you lack a belief, you are an atheist. No, that doesn't work that way. It's just that in some groups, like internet atheism, they prefer a very loose definition, like lack of belief. And that's for political reasons. It's to, one, to help normalize the term atheism, and two, to gain membership for groups like American Atheist and the Atheist Experience. It literally is for political. It's no other reason for it other than that. David Silverman has had more than said this on numerous occasions. You've said that in Hangouts with on G+. He says it in his book, Fighting God. This is what their agenda is to have people take that label. But I find that to be philosophically unsound. I find it to be actually counterproductive. I prefer more precise terminology. And why anybody thinks that they're able to put their definitions on other people, I'm really confused by that, because I have never called somebody like Duke an agnostic, even though he believes there's no gods, but somebody that just lacks a belief. I don't go around saying, well, you're not a true atheist, you're agnostic. Now people accuse me of that, but nobody's ever heard me say that, which is the funniest thing. I get accused of that. I literally get accused of Steve's prescribing this, and Steve's telling atheists who merely lack a belief that they're really truly agnostics and they can't say the word atheist. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? I've never made such an argument ever on any video or any platform. And it's one of those 3 men and a tiger situations where people repeated this thing so often they think it's true, but it's never happened.
I did want to hear, Ozzy, did you have why Steve's definition is better than the colloquial? Or am I going backwards? I don't want to go backwards.
Yeah, no, Ozzy hasn't answered it yet. Why mine has more specificity.
Yeah, I don't want to dwell on this too long. I was hoping that this discussion would
You're never going to get away from it, Ozzy.
Would never end up. Yeah, I know. I've been having.
Yeah, well, look at the time. I got to get going.
But okay, so I think the thing to keep in mind is this: these terms exist precisely to distinguish various philosophical positions that you can take with respect to the existence of God. And that's why the term atheist has long been understood to be someone who thinks that there isn't a God. In fact, the term atheist is actually older than the term theism. I know that seems counterintuitive to people, because they imagine that theism had to exist first, because they think theism is a root in the alpha privative A in atheism was appended to an existing word theism, but that is in fact not how it happened. It happened the other way around. In a world where virtually everyone was theist, you didn't have to have a word for theism. You needed a word for the people who thought there wasn't a God. And they called them atheists. They borrowed from a Greek word, an existing Greek word, which wasn't always used. And in fact, in early usage, wasn't used for people who didn't believe in God at all. So you have the word atheism that gets coined before the word theism. The word agnosticism gets coined much later by Thomas Henry Huxley around 1856 or something like that, or early 1860s. I forget. It's coined by him precisely to pick out those people who are undecided who are undecided on the question of God's existence, who do not hold the view that there is a God, and they don't hold the view that there isn't a God. That word gets coined to distinguish these positions further, okay, so that no one confuses an atheist with a person who's simply undecided on the fence, or who thinks the question is undecidable in principle, as Huxley thought. So these terms exist to distinguish these various positions. And so if you define the word atheism such that it includes agnostics in it, you have lost specificity. You have lost some rigor. You have lost some definitional precision. It's not that defining atheism as a lack of belief is imprecise in the sense that it's unclear. It's perfectly clear But the point is you have now subsumed more people under that heading. And so you have lost an analytical distinction. You've lost the ability to distinguish these people. Then you have to introduce other words in there, right? So these words exist precisely to carve up people along the typology of positions. That's why they exist as they do. That's why they've been understood that way. And with respect to sort of colloquial definitions, I mean, I think atheism understood as theism, lacking atheism, or non-theism, which is another word. That is colloquial. That is something that has sort of grown up within the atheist movement in recent decades. But that is a newfangled definition. And the idea that that's how it's used outside of philosophy, but and it is incorrect. If you walk out on the street and you ask people, what's a theist, what's an atheist, what's an agnostic, you will find that people's linguistic intuitions line up exactly with the philosophical conception. They'll tell you an atheist is someone who thinks there's no God. An agnostic is someone whose mind is not made up on the matter, right? And you can consult non-philosophical sources. You can consult ordinary dictionaries like the Merriam-Webster dictionary. I'm looking at it now, right? Under atheism, they list two definitions: a disbelief in the existence of a deity. That's ambiguous. That could be lack of belief, or it could be the positive view. And they have another definition: B, the doctrine that there is no deity. So that's a vernacular definition, right? The compact Oxford English Dictionary defines atheism as the belief that God does not exist. That's not lacking belief. That's more than lacking belief. That's the belief that God does not exist. The Cambridge Advanced Learners Dictionary, okay, again, not a philosophical dictionary, defines an atheist as someone who believes that God or gods do not exist. Webster's Concise Electronic Dictionary. These are all modern dictionaries, by the way, right? These are electronic dictionaries, many of them, right? Defines an atheist as one who denies the existence of God. So there's plenty of vernacular usage that employs exactly the same usage as the philosophical. So it's not like the philosophers have their own particular way of understanding this term in academia, but the whole rest of the world doesn't use it that way. It's not true, though.
The
rest of the world uses the definition that's used in philosophy.
This was the exact point that I was making to Dr. Carrier. Carrier, for some reason, thinks that even in the general populace, that they use the more colloquial terminology, and he calls that common. We call the philosophical speak elvish. So if you see us talking about common and elvish, that's what we're talking about. And I kept trying to explain to him, well, I need to know more about your uses of common. Are you meaning common as far as like internet atheism and what you find in our group? Or do you mean in the general populace that doesn't really, do much with these things? What the average Joe would believe, right? And so he doesn't think there's much of a distinction there. But I go out and I do ask people, and they find it must be in line with the philosophical literature. But it's not just a dictionary, it's the encyclopedias that I think are really more telling, because if you look at any of the encyclopedias, I haven't found one yet, and maybe they do exist. If you do know of one, let me know, but I haven't found one yet that holds atheism as a standard to be just merely a lack of belief. They all have it is a belief that God doesn't exist. Oxford's Encyclopedia of Atheism has it that way. Stanford has it that way. Cambridge has it as standard. Quote, they even use the word standard. It's ubiquitous. I don't find any source that says otherwise. Now, there might be, but even still, I do think in my experience that even in the general population, the average person holds that atheism is the belief that God doesn't exist. Now, that doesn't mean that is the case or anybody has to subscribe to that. But I do argue that if you're going to tell me that the average population around the world holds to the colloquial definition, I need more evidence for that, because I'm not convinced by that by any stretch of the imagination. Does that answer your question? Whoever it was. Oh, wait. we got new callers coming in.
That was an answer to Duke.
That was a Duke's. Okay.
He's got, but we've got.
All right. So let's move on a little bit here. A new caller. The one that got in here before. We have two callers in here, and then we got also Sokka snuck in. I'm gonna let Sokka in. So first caller, the one that's talking right now that just said something, or thought I did. Who's that?
Hello.
There you go. Yeah. What you got? Who's this?
This is Chris Mann. I've spoken to you before.
Oh yeah, I know Chris.
Yeah, Chris Mann. I was arguing on the side of the Duke, and I heard him call in a few minutes ago. I was just really hoping that, you know, my understanding of the disagreement between you, Steve, and the Duke is really kind of complicated, and I can't explain it in just a couple of minutes. And so that's why I was hoping that you would watch that video that I spent so much time making.
I will watch. No, I will watch. I'm not trying to not. I have limited time. I promise you, I will watch it. Okay?
I understand.
Yeah, I will.
I understand. And I just wanted to point out that I think I addressed some of the points that you made, even again tonight. Some of your retorts to the Duke, I mean, they were in the video, and I tried to explain what my counter argument would be, and so yeah, once you get a chance,
sure. Do you have a question for Nick or Ozzy? I think Nick's up next. Ozzy's got a little bit of airtime.
I don't really have a question. I mean, of course, I would still be open to speaking with Ozzy one-on-one.
There are other questions other than atheism too. You can ask about morality. You can ask about mereological nihilism. You can ask about
yeah.
Chris, you said you wanted to have a conversation at some point. Yeah, we can totally do that at some point. Yeah, but did you have a question for me or for Nick, or did you just have a comment that you can remark on it maybe? Or
I think SJ's in the room. She had a comment or a question too. If he didn't,
yeah. Chris, did you want to finish up, and then we're going to get to SJ?
Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to say, let me see. Ozzy once again tonight repeated that the Duke's definition of atheism would, you know, get rid of distinctions. We would lose granularity. You restated that kind of statement, and of course, I just want to point out that again, you know, that's not necessarily the case that you lose granularity, because you can always come up with new words for the different subcategories. And I guess that's about it for tonight. We can talk about it later. Oh, and Sean Carroll in the chat, I was hoping, because I had left the comment under the video the previous time, and I had a little back and forth with Sean Carroll from the live chat, and I was hoping that Carroll would respond to that comment that I left, because he seemed like he would be willing to critique my position. And so I was hoping he would get back to me. That's it. Thank you.
All right, SJ.
Howdy.
Let me guess, you're going to ask about Molinism.
What's that?
I said you're going to ask about Molinism, aren't you? I don't know what you're going to ask.
No. No, I have a different topic. Kind of related though, but a different topic. I was wondering if well, I don't know if it's totally new. I was just wondering, what are your opinions, the three of you, on whether or not, and this is switching topics a little bit from the atheism topic to something different, wondering if you endorse the idea of objective moral duties. Like, do you think that we have objective moral duties, and are they universal in this world?
Awesome question.
Yes.
Yeah,
in fact, I have a video on my channel. I don't know if it'll be of interest to you, or maybe you've seen it. I don't know. I don't want to.
No, I haven't. I'll have to get that.
Okay.
Can you put a link in here?
Yeah, I'll put it in there. I know which videos you've been talking about.
Yeah, it's I can't remember what it's called. Morality and Speech Act Theory or something like. I can't remember what it's called. But anyway, that video is specifically my own view on deontology. It's a video in which it's a hangout I did where I was asked a series of questions by someone. It was just sort of off the cuff, but it was.
There's a couple. There's Bert Poole has a video. Want me to put that one?
There's one on my channel, and I edited. I sort of it's truncated a little bit. Bert Poole's video would be fine, but
all right, I'll give you the.
Anyway, I think it's called Speech Act Theory and Morality, or Morality and Speech Act Theory, or something like that. Anyway, the word Speech Act Theory is in there, and it is my articulation of where I think the concept of duty and obligation comes from. Where does it come from? How do we come by it? And I offer it up as a rigorously naturalistic, non-supernatural, non-purposive account of the origin or the genesis of deontology. Deontology is just a fancy philosophical word for that area of moral discourse that deals with the concept of moral duty and obligation. So when you say that you should do something, must do something, have an obligation to do something, those are deontological statements. So yes, I think that we have objective moral duties. I'm a moral realist, and I think that that view can be grounded quite naturalistically, and it's a function of something called speech act theory.
Nick, you want to add on that?
Can you explain that theory? Because I haven't heard of that.
Oh, that'll take an hour.
That's a long
2 hours. I tried to dive into speech act theory, and I'm still trying. It's complicated as I learned.
It's not complicated. It's not complicated. It's just that it's not. Well, I mean, it's complicated. It's not hard to understand. It's just that it's you can't just articulate.
Ozzy, I learned about 50 new words that I still don't even know what they mean.
Okay, but I promise you, my video walks you through it step by step, the basics of speech act theory, and specifically this concept of performative utterances and how those are connected to our deontological concepts, our concepts of duty and obligation.
What do you think, Nick? Do you think that we have deontological duties?
This is interesting because actually Ozzy and I were just talking about this earlier this afternoon.
That's right.
And I think I probably want to limit how much I'm going to talk about it, because in 6 days I've got a debate on the subject with Andrew. I can't pronounce his last Straightalese. Thank you. So I want to probably not try to talk about it too much. I think, and I've told SJ this before, and this is not an uncommon position, that our morality is perfectly well explained through evolution and how and why we've developed the moral values that we have. Every species has a moral intuition relative to its, or proportionate, I should say, to its intelligence. So, dolphins have morality, dogs have morality. It's not necessarily our morality. They have a pack mentality. They operate differently, but there are rules, and there are rules that you can find that are common to all of them. Cannibalism is usually not permissible in just about any species. Then there are some exceptions, but I think that intuition that we have that tells us that has us seek the approval of, at first it's our parents, then it becomes our peers, but to seek approval may be the wrong word, but to have them think highly of us is ingrained in us, and is without it we would not have become the dominant species on the planet. We are the dominant species because we were able to adapt that morality and a social contract. So I don't think I'd be hard pressed to find, and Ozzy and I did talk about this, and he gave me something to think about, but I'd be hard pressed to say that there's a morality outside of that which we developed inside that framework.
Yeah, I just find it odd that there's so much pushback when it comes to meta-ethical theories. People hear the term objective morality and they lose their shit for some reason. And I can't quite figure out why. It's just a meta-ethical position. It's not even normative, right? It doesn't tell you right or wrong. It doesn't tell you what you do in a certain situation. If you think there are moral facts, and you think there can be moral facts that exist independently of people's bias or opinion, and if somebody disagrees, it doesn't make a difference. 1 + 1 = 2, no matter if you disagree or not, accept, it makes no difference. It's objectively a true case. If you think that a moral proposition is truth apt, that it can be true or false, and you think that it can be true regardless if somebody says otherwise, then you can have an objective moral framework. Matter of fact, there's numerous people that have written on this, of how to have an objective moral framework. There's no big deal for it. It's just, it doesn't mean that all morals have to be objective. It doesn't mean that all morals have to be subjective. It just means that you can have a situation based upon whatever grounding that you do, where I think you could build an objective moral framework. But I see atheists all the time saying, "Oh, there's no such thing as objective morality," and I don't know what they mean by that. If you can,
I think I do.
What do they mean by that then? Because I mean, you can make something that case, but what I mean, I should say, I think that what they think is that when they hear objective morality, that they think there's something woven into the space-time continuum, that it has to exist independently of the universe, that it is the case. And I think that's kind of a derivation of what the theist narrative had.
That if we were to take all of human figures, those objective morals would somehow still exist.
Yeah. Well, hang on, SJ. Ozzy, you sitting and elucidate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that there's really a couple of reasons why people who sort of tend to be in the atheist camp, bristle at the idea of objective morality. The principal one is that there isn't a lot of agreement on moral claims. And so their idea of objectivity has more to do with intersubjective agreement. And people will observe, hey, there's not a lot of intersubjective agreement on the subject of morality. I mean, there's lots of agreement. What's that? Well, yeah.
Equivocation of the word objective, though. They're not using it the way that
that's right. That's right. But if I say, look, it's an objective fact that there's a cup here, and I'm sitting here on this table next to me. What that means is that there's a mind-independent state of affairs, namely that there's a cup over here, right? I don't need to exist. No one needs to exist, right? If a cup exists, it exists. And if every human being disappeared, it would still be a fact, right? And moreover, every fact about the cup is equally accessible to any competent observer. Judgment is not required, right, for the cup to exist, right? So whenever we're talking about an abstract property, right, people get sort of their knickers in a twist about whether something exists because objectively, because part of what a lot of people think of when they think of objectivity is that you should be able to demonstrate to any rational person's satisfaction the veracity of what it is that you're claiming, right? That it's objective in that sense. I can demonstrate to any rational, competent observer that I'm holding a cup here, right? In principle, right? Whereas if I said something like my elbow hurts, right, or I have a toothache, all right, it'd be very hard to demonstrate that fact is subjective. It exists in me. It's tied to me, right? It's not even tied to us. It's tied to me. There's a certain sense in which it's private. It is. I can communicate it to you. You can infer it, but I'm aware of my pain in a way that you can't be, and you're aware of your pain in a way that I can't be. That's not true for the cup. There's no private facts about the cup, right? So the epistemological access to the facts about the cup are different than they would be for facts about, for instance, my having a toothache. So people notice that people disagree about alleged moral facts and moral propositions, and they say, well, there doesn't seem to be a way to settle these discussions, these disagreements, right? There doesn't seem to be a decision procedure. And so they conclude, therefore, there's no fact of the matter, right? But there was a time when we didn't know that the earth was round. There was a time where that was controversial. Curiously enough, it seems to be controversial again. But the fact that there's a controversy about the shape of the earth doesn't imply for a moment that there's no shape to the earth. It doesn't, the ontology is not to be called into question just because there's a disagreement. Sure, if there are no moral facts, we would expect there'd be disagreement, right? But the fact that we disagree doesn't necessitate that there are no moral facts. So, and that I think the principal reason people say, they notice, hey, people just disagree like crazy about what the moral facts there be, if there be any. Well, therefore there can't be any. And that I think is a mistake, that it's just a complete non sequitur. But that I think is the intuition that governs it. People notice that the moral facts, if there are any, are not readily demonstrable. There's no decision procedure for establishing them.
I think that probably comes from a lot of people have a scientific background, and in science, objective means that there's something to be had consensus-wise, right? Objective means that I'm going to look at something and Nicholas is going to look at something, and we're going to see the same thing. That's what objective kind of would refer to in a scientific thing. This is the whole thing on relativity, right? What's the objective viewpoint for something traveling in motions compared to a non-relativistic speed? They have different views, right? Because there's no one objective viewpoint. So we use the term differently in science than it's used in philosophy, and trying to explain to them that it's not used exactly the same way. It's very difficult because they're just locked into that. Well, if there's not in this intersubjective agreement, then we can't have objective morality, and it has no relevancy to if there's objective morality or not. I've given an example. I even give you, SJ, an example. I know you have a debate coming on this soon too. I give you an example of something that is an objective moral fact within a framework. That it's a true statement, right? If you accept that morality can have propositions. Some people don't, right? Some people think that you can't even have a moral proposition. There'd be a moral non-cognitivist. But this knee-jerk reaction that some people have saying, well, objective morality is just impossible. I don't even know how that's a tenable position. It makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Well, I got a view on that.
By the way, welcome, Saka. people don't know, Sokka's in here.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you guys doing?
Hey, what's up? How's it going, man? How's it going, Sokka?
Don't know why.
It's going good. Awesome, man.
Sorry.
What you got for us, Sokka? Go ahead, weigh in, buddy. Oh, Sokka.
Okay. Well, these conversations, especially the first time that we approached.
Oh, you're I think you're muting yourself, Sokka. I'm not doing it. I'm really not muting you.
Yeah, you're muted, Sokka.
Let me see if I'm gonna mute him. Nope,
And
he's hard muted.
Breaking up before.
Yeah, there you go. Try now.
Okay. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So I think that one of the problems is that when we get brought into these conversations in this type of community here, is that a lot of times people are coming in with not a lot of understanding or knowledge on any type of topics of ethics, and what ends up happening is in a lot of these conversations, your position starts getting defined for you. So you'll hear things like you'll get talking with people that believe in like a lot of theists will put out positions there like that objective morality cannot exist without God, and they'll define they'll ask people to provide some type of objective grounding for their morals, and they'll define what an objective grounding is, almost synonymously, coincidentally enough, with a God, and that becomes the benchwork from what a lot of people start off by working with. Is that they believe that they actually believe into the claims that for objective morals to exist, that there has to be some type of objective grounding in some type of like transcendental form, like a God, to for those morals to exist. And because we let people define what our positions are and take bad understandings of what these positions are, we find ourselves just rejecting those notions outright. Because like our first interactions are, well, moral objectivity almost becomes synonymous with God, morality, and that's why I think that you get that vitriol from a lot of atheists when they start hearing these topics. We're like, no, objective morals can't exist.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. Cosmic Skeptic has the same thing. I think he suffers what I call subjective reductionism. Where he basically, because he says, well, everything comes down to subjectivity in some regards. It doesn't necessarily hold. If you have an objective moral framework, you can base it upon subjective axioms, right? Mathematics is an objective moral or some objective truth. 1 + 1 = 2, and the axioms are not objective. They are actually subjective. They're arbitrary. We can accept some. We can accept others. If you have some kind of grounding, that doesn't have to be objective. Now, I have the problem with like divine command theory because I'm not convinced that's even objective to begin with. It's called ethical subjectivism for a reason. But if somebody grounds that in God, one, like I said, I don't think that's truly objective. But even if it is, I think what the theist makes this mistake is that they're saying that's the only possible way you can have objective morality, and that's completely just not the case. Obviously,
can I explain a view on that from the theist perspective?
Well, you're the theist in the room. Yeah, go for it.
I know.
We have to have a token one. It's mandatory for YouTube. Yeah.
I have a paper under review right now that basically says objective moral duties are real, evidenced, and grounded in God. So I actually have done a lot of research on this. But as far as what Steve said, Steve, you were talking about, actually Ozzy, going back to Ozzy talking about deontology, because when we try to figure out the normative ethical framework, that's actually the one I was using, and that's where deontology fits. And deontology explains our moral duties to do what's right, just like what Ozzy said. And the other idea that Jonathan Haidt has endorsed is consequentialism. So he looks at that sort of idea, and that's falling under the teleological framework. So under the teleological framework, we use a reasoning perspective and moral intuitions. And actually, under the deontological network, if we look at it based on the Kantian perspective, we focus on reasoning, but then there's other perspectives that say we should focus on intuition under that one too. But the idea with the consequentialism position is that's the grounding that they use. They use the consequence to ground it. And under the deontological network, we use the moral duties. And the question is do we have moral duties that transcend cultures and eras? And we actually do. Studies have indicated that basically we focus on things such as the golden rule. There's a study that's pointed out that all 7 major religions and atheism and humanism have all developed the same ideas that we should focus on the golden rule and search for meaning and purpose. And then you look at the other studies like from Schwartz that says that we should all be benevolent. The highest moral value, according to every single culture, according to Schwartz, with a major multi-country study, is that we should be focusing on benevolence, which is kind of coincidental because it's a selfless focus. And so what's neat about these studies, and there's more, I can go on, but what's neat about the studies is that they show that we're all hardwired to focus on selflessness. And so the question is, where did that come from? I mean, we've got a competition idea or cooperation idea. If we talk about evolution, evolution is descriptive. It's not prescriptive, so it can't explain our moral duty. So we have to figure out what else can explain our moral duties besides our composition. So that's where I'm coming from. And I'm realizing it's very cold in this room. So I'm actually kind of chilling while I'm talking. So sorry about that.
Ozzy, I there's some embers that I have, which what she said, but go for
there's
it.
a number of things I would take issue with, but well, first of all, I think it's important if you're going to study morality, you have to sort of look at what moral discourse is. You have to look at what people think morality is, right? I mean, we don't confuse talk about preferences, about pizza toppings. We don't confuse those for moral questions, right? And yet those have to do with values and judgment, right? But somehow these are not moral value judgments. You say, you like pineapple on your pizza, right? And I'm not going to, take offense at it, right? I might go, ooh, that's gross. I would never do that. But I don't confuse that with some sort of moral failure on your part, right? I might just think that you have
I do.
taste.
I'm sorry.
Well,
it's not really impermissible to have pineapple and call it pizza.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's a joke, right? There's a running gag. It's all over the internet about, pineapple on pizza, and where people feign moral outrage, right? And the reason it's a funny joke is because, of course, it isn't morally outrageous. There's nothing moral or immoral about it. We recognize that it's a preference. We recognize that preference.
Speaking for the guy that likes pineapple on his pizza.
I do like pineapple on my pizza.
Pagan.
But the reason it's kind of a funny gag is because people like to act as if they're outraged the way they would be if you had said that you were, putting human babies on your pizza, slices of human children or something like that on your pizza, right? Oh, they say that's not just disgusting, it's awful, it's evil, it's immoral, right? That's the gag. The gag is precisely everybody knows that this is not a moral question, right? And yet it has to do with tastes. It has to do with values and judgment. But clearly there's a distinction in people's minds between moral judgments and other kinds of judgments, right? Such as, mere tastes, matters of taste. So you have to sort of look at human beings and how they live their lives, how they conduct themselves, and how they talk, to figure out what is the domain of morality. What kinds of questions and concepts are operative in morality? So it's important to do that kind of anthropology and sociology to figure out what falls within the domain of morality. But I don't think you can just sort of leave it there. And that's sort of the first thing that you've got to do, right? That sort of defines the limits and boundaries of what the discourse are. But you don't stop there. With respect to what you said about evolution, that evolution is descriptive and not prescriptive, I wholeheartedly agree. But it doesn't follow that because evolution gives us a description of how we came up with our pro-social emotions and pro-social instincts, that doesn't, in fact, characterize and explain why we have an area of human discourse called moral discourse. Right? Why do we have a preoccupation with the concepts of right and wrong? Right? Why do we have a concept of that which is permissible, that which is impermissible, that which is obligatory, and that which is supererogatory, above and beyond the call of duty? Right? We have these concepts. Right? Every culture has them, and they differ in what falls under those various headings: permissible and impermissible, and obligatory and supererogatory, right? Every culture has those basic concepts. What specific actions fall under those headings, that differs quite dramatically. But there's a lot of commonality across some, right? So obviously just killing anybody willy-nilly, betraying your family and loved ones and those in your community and stuff like that, those are no-nos. Courage is almost always a virtue, for instance, across cultures. I don't know of any exceptions. So I'm familiar with some of that literature, but I would expect, precisely because we are humans, we're all members of the same species, and that because we are social organisms, that we would have evolved certain pro-social instincts and pro-social emotions, just the way dogs and horses have, right? And it's why dogs and horses have different pro-social emotions and instincts than we do. We're different kinds of creatures. So I think it's the kind of creatures that we are that dictates the kinds of pro-social instincts and emotions that we have. And we don't just have pro-social emotions and instincts, we also have antisocial ones. So you can't just look to the natural world to dictate how you ought to live, but you need more than that. You need reason. You need to figure things out. But it's certainly not true that just because something is evolved, that it's somehow not part of the explanatory story. I think that evolution is a big part of the explanation for how we're supposed to ground morality. It's just not the whole story.
I agree with you. I totally agree, Ozzy. I agree that, and I just want to say something as far as evolution, and I think you'd agree with this. Evolution does a great job in explaining a good portion of our personality. There's a study by Iles, ILIES, and a bunch of co-authors in 2006 out of the Journal of Organizational Behavior that showed that a lot of our personality traits, just like you mentioned, and that also has to do with our emotional traits, a lot of those come from our parents, so they're hereditary. And so the fact that we're empathetic, for example, that's something that comes from our parents. But going beyond that is what I'm trying to say. So that explains how we're likely to act and behave in certain situations, but it doesn't explain how we know what we should do, and how we all have this certain moral code that transcends just all of our bodies individually, and brings us into this idea that we should be following something better than ourselves.
Well, I can refer you again to that video I did that will give you some sense. And I'm sorry, by the way, I mean, I couldn't just trot out speech act theory here. It really would take us far afield here. But I mean, if you watch that video, I think you'll get a sense of where I think the grounding of specifically of deontological concepts are concepts of obligation and duty. That, I think, is an important ingredient in morality. It's not all consequentialism, right? I think consequentialism and the kind of rational calculus we do when we do moral reasoning, that is a part of morality. That's part of the domain of morality. But there's another part. So if you're a strict consequentialist, I think you're going to end up with a moral system that's going to be missing something critical. And similarly, if you're a strict deontologist, if you're like Kant or something like that, you're going to miss out an important part of moral reasoning that is the consequentialist part of it. So you need both. And so you need an account that ultimately grounds both. And I think natural selection is part of that story.
I completely agree with you. That's exactly one of my theses, and that basis is Christian synderesis, it's called it, which is the combination of the two.
I'm not familiar with that, so.
And why are you leaving the utilitarians out in the cold there, Ozzy? They're not good enough for you?
Well, they're consequential.
No, they're under consequential.
I guess they would be under consequentialism.
Yeah.
I guess it's a subset of that. Okay, fair enough.
But and for the record, I subscribe to virtue-based ethics, so I think that neither the consequentialists or the deontologists are right. They've both got and I think virtue ethics sort of captures
I like virtue ethics
what's
too.
right about both and explains what's wrong with both. So.
Yeah, no, I like looking at virtues as a golden mean between two vices. I think that actually kind of makes sense for me from a Aristotelian type of view. Yeah, Jay, what's up?
Well, first of all, let me just comment on what Ozzy was saying. You know, the proof of what he was saying about evolution is that there is this cross-cultural commonality in, you know, the basic, you know, bottom level structure of our morality. I mean, it, you know, definitely comes from evolution, and it's an ingrained thing. But okay, here's my question now. SJ represented deists, so allow me to represent idiots. And see, because I don't know how stupid this question is, but in my mind,
we'll give it to Nick either way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, he takes all the stupid questions. Okay, but isn't in my mind, where there is seemingly an objective moral framework, it just boils down to a consensus, or, you know, that cross-cultural commonality, the you know, the basic beliefs of morality that all humans seem to possess. Isn't it just basically a consensus that we've come to? I mean,
For objective morality?
yeah, I mean,
No.
I'm saying it's a seemingly objective framework, though.
That's what Ozzy was saying. Objective morality doesn't care whether people agree with it or not. It's not irrelevant to any kind of intersubjective consensus of any kind. It's an objective fact that exists regardless of people agreement or not. That's the whole point why it's objective.
Well,
The mere fact somebody could disagree doesn't matter if 1 + 1 = 2. If SJ was sitting there telling me 1 + 1 = 3, she would just be wrong, right? I mean, there's an objective fact of the matter we can look at in that regard. It doesn't matter that the fact somebody disagrees.
I guess that's why I've always, and whether I'm wrong or not, I guess that's why I've always fell into that camp that says it's all subjective. I just can't seem to wrap my head around that. I mean, when you say it's objective and it doesn't matter who agrees with it, if human sentient beings didn't exist, would morality still exist? I mean,
no, I don't think it would.
Yeah, I don't think. I think morality exists because we're moral agents, right? We're agents of moral consideration. If there was no considerations to be had, you wouldn't have morality.
Yeah, here's a confusion that people have. They think that something could only be objective if human consciousness was just not at all involved. Okay, let me ask you to consider this. Consider your own pain. Consider when a toothache, when you have a really acute tooth pain, right? That's a fact about the world. That's a fact about the world like any other. Would you have a toothache if you didn't exist, if you didn't have a mind? No. Okay, that's a subjective fact, but it's still real. It's still a feature of the world, right? Subjectivity is a fact, right? It's an objective fact. It's a real feature of the world. If you've got a theory of reality that excludes the reality of things like pain and visual perception and memory and desire and so forth, there's something really sorely lacking in your picture of reality, right? And so it's a real objective feature of the world, but it's not epistemologically objective. It's not equally accessible. I don't have access to your pain in the way that you do, but it isn't any less real, right? So the kind of objectivity you're talking about is what you're wanting two things. You want it to be equally accessible to any competent observer, and you want intersubjective agreement, right? And I would submit that you don't need both of those things for something to be objective, right? We're talking about objective in the sense that, is it real? Is it, when I talk about moral facts, what I'm saying is there are moral truths, right? If you say that, to kill so-and-so who's, completely innocent just for your own wanton pleasure or something like that would be wrong. I think I'm stating a truth, okay? There's something that makes it the case that it's true. Okay, there's a truth maker for that statement, right? And there are features of the world that make it true. Part of the features that make that true is that there are agents in the world, namely us, who want to continue living and don't want to be interfered with, and certainly don't want to be killed. That's part of it. Okay, so you can have a theory about something being real and actual and objective, and it can include subjectivity. So the fact that I think what confounds people here is that they think, well, morality involves judgment. And then they think that morality consists of only judgment. There you go. It's just like pineapple on pizza. It's just your preferences. Do you like chocolate or vanilla? But no, that's not the case, right? Let me sort of ask you to consider something like mathematics, okay? Right, 2 + 2 is 4. 2 + 2 is 4 is not found in the world. And you might say, well, yeah, there's two objects and there's two more objects, and if you count them up, they add up to 4. That's true. Yes, there are lots of objects in the world. But the veracity of the sentence, 2 + 2 = 4, does not depend on there being objects. If there were no objects of any kind, it would still be the case. It would still be true that 2 + 2 = 4. 2 + 2 = 4 transcends any particular set of objects, and that you can count them. You don't need people to count for that proposition to be true, right? And how do we sort of assess whether something is mathematically true? We don't have to run an experiment. We don't have to consult the world to figure out if 2 + 2 = 4. right? If you want to know, is there a prime number between any two sets of numbers, right? Or how many primes there are between any two sets of numbers? You don't do an experiment. You just have to think about it, right? And if you're good at mathematics, you'll be able to come up with the right answer, hopefully, right? And there might be some mathematical truths that are unanswerable, right? But the point is, all of the truths of mathematics, they're not physical facts about the world, right? And they require a subject to discover them. Every fact requires a subject to discover them. So the fact that a subject is involved in the discovery and specification of a fact doesn't make the fact subjective. Right? So there's a lot of different conceptions of objective here, right? Sometimes objective is used to mean real. Sometimes it's used just as a synonym for something proposition being true. Sometimes it's used to mean mind independent. Sometimes it's used to mean intersubjective agreement, and on and on. It's just a whole. And sometimes, like when theists use it, when they talk about objective morality, usually what they're talking about is something like a rule that is universal and exceptionless and unchanging. Right? They have a particular legalistic view of objectivity, and if morality doesn't result in moral rules that are exceptionless, universal, and unchanging, then that's not objective, right? So you have, before you sort of talk about whether you can have objective morality, you have to decide on what you mean by
clarify the term.
Objective. You got to clarify what you mean by morality. You got to clarify what you mean by.
Yeah, we've had a few debates on that situation where people use the term, differently, and I'm trying to explain to them, look, you guys have cross purposes. You guys are talking past each other because you're using it one way and somebody else using another, and I see it happen all the time, right? And so people get on my case when I say, objective morality you can have, because they're using it like for some this agreement among people, right? It's intersubjective agreement, and that's not how I'm using it, because that's not how it's going to be used when you're talking about the meta-ethical theory of objective morality. But anyways, Nick, you want to add on that? Or you can keep muted and just be quiet. It's up to you.
Oh, hey.
I don't know if this is.
You guys hear me?
Yeah.
I had a question for Nick.
Yeah, go ahead. I guess Nick, you didn't want to add to that. You good to go?
There was nothing significant. It actually gets. This
just
is
nod your head in agreement like you normally do, and yeah, there you go. That's awesome. We like that. Okay, go ahead, caller. Who we got here?
Hey, man, it's Jimmy or Casey in the chat room.
Awesome.
Hey, I had a question for Nick. Have you ever heard of the perennial philosophy, or even Ozzy?
Yeah, it sounds familiar, but
it's this. I don't know if you've ever looked it up before. It's the notion that all the major religions share a single metaphysical truth.
Pantheism, essentially. Is that
well, yeah, you could say that. You could say that all major religions ultimately point to a type of pantheism or panentheism that is entailed within the perennialist view. What about like the term mystical experience? Does that ring a bell? William James' work, any of that?
Yeah, I've read William James on the Variety of Religious Experience.
Yeah, the Varieties of Religious Experience. Are you guys familiar with the studies in Baltimore, Maryland going on right now with psilocybin, where these neuroscientists are claiming that, through a pill with their volunteers, a single high dose of psilocybin, they can induce an experience which they see virtually identical to the so-called reported mystical experiences reported by mystics throughout the ages of all the various major religions. And so even in the research, if you look at the peer-reviewed studies, they'll emphasize the perennialist view, or the view of the perennialist philosophy, in that every religion has a term that points to the experience. In Christianity, it's called theoria, or the beatific vision. In Buddhism, it's nirvana or Buddha nature. Hinduism, samadhi, sekhel mufla. In Judaism, each of the world's major religions all have a term to refer to these mystical states. And you can find, spiritual disciplines that you find in mysticism practiced in all of the world's major religions in the form of, meditation and so forth.
Doesn't that
I was just wondering if,
real quick, doesn't that kind of lend to the narrative that a lot of this stuff's like natural? Because I kind of looked at it this way: if we could induce these things with psilocybin or DMT or LSD or whatever your hallucinative choices, that one, we know these things do exist in the brain. We know that DMT can exist in the brain. We do know that people can have these experiences. We know that people have had them throughout the ages. If there is some kind of mystical ontology out there that is real, there's something that it does exist independent of mind. Why are they using mind altered states in order to have access to them? I never understood.
I think I can answer that. I think I can answer that because I follow this research very diligently. One of the reasons is, if you look at, they do study naturally occurring, mystical experiences. You can look into the Tibetan monks or the Carmelite nuns who practice these disciplines, who engage these states. The thing is, in a scientific study, they're not very reliable because they're very kind of spontaneous. And so when a nun has it, they have to be there right there and then. Otherwise, it's
No,
gone.
I get that, but here's the thing. I've noticed this, and by the way, there's a weird clicking noise. And then I'll get to Saka. Saka wants to ask a question. Here's the thing that I think is weird. When people have those mystical experiences, or when have like lucid dreams and things of that nature, I've never seemed to acquire any knowledge that I didn't already have. There's anything new that is out of the blue, right? I mean, people, now don't get me wrong, people can experience things and create songs and write lyrics and poetry, but I've never heard of anything. I know, by the way, I know people have discovered things through LSD. I know it opens up your mind, but I mean, I've never heard of anybody like literally, I don't know how to put it. Getting knowledge they'd possibly
acquiring a new fact that they didn't know.
Yeah, something that is so, like, for example, I've been told by this one planet that exists in some solar system that I can give you the precise coordinates. There's aliens there, and we can point.
I think that's a misconception about it.
Never happened.
I think to think of it that way, like you're gonna find your lost car keys or something. I think that's a misconception. It's more. I don't know if you've ever heard of the physicist Carlo Rovelli. He actually became interested in astrophysics after an LSD trip, where he saw time.
I know there's a lot of stories. I've read a lot of inventions that were supposedly created on acid.
Well, I mean, you made a good point about it being natural. Even the neuroscientists in the study, I mean, these studies have been going on for about, I think they're at their 18th year at Johns Hopkins. They started like around 99, and they have concluded that yes, they are indeed biologically normal. It's something that we seem to be wired for. And, in these experiences, they have these it's not something mystical or vague. It's not misty or vague. They have these concrete definitions that they've been developing over decades of research since the work of William James. William James, his original outline is what they based it off from, and they've been elaborating since then, refining it over the decades. And so now they have it pretty much to a T. I mean, they can describe the type of universal characteristics, which they named 6, that happen in this experience. And, I'll give you like one example is volunteers will describe what they can't really say other than having this sense of transcending time and space or timelessness. Of course, that's one thing to say. It's a very other thing to try to put into words, or even a sense of unconditional love for all people and things. And even so, the research even say that, perhaps this is where the moral tenets of religion come from. This unchanging, unconditional love it might be rooted in these experiences in all of the major religions. They're not saying it's something supernatural in the sense that defies physics. It may have been this natural phenomenon in consciousness the whole time. And so when I speak to atheists, I'm always wondering, like, man, why not try? What's stopping you from doing this? You know what I mean? If you really want to ascertain truth.
Well, because DMT is illegal as hell where I'm at.
And what evidence is it? Let's assume that everything you just said is true. What evidence is it that it's truth? So if we assume everything that you've said so far is a fact, I should say, then it still doesn't mean that it's somehow that tripping on LSD or any of these is going to get you closer to truth.
Well, I mean, of course, in the major religions, it's considered ultimate truth. These states are highly valued. Like Hinduism or Buddhism is basically pointing to nirvana. It's saying, do that. And I mean, and it could be discerned throughout all. Like if you even hear one of these researchers speak on they'll mention how they consider these mystical experiences the very evidence for the perennial philosophy. And I mean, it's I wish, I don't know if you have anything to say in regards to that. I would like to send you a link, Nick, if you don't mind, man, on some of this stuff. There's a talk given by Roland Griffiths, the leader of the research, Dr. Roland Griffiths, at I think a TED talk that he gives, and he talks about how if we could possibly find out the neural correlates of what's going on in the brain when people have these types of experiences, we may be able to unravel the mystery of an objective morality in religion, something that seems to be intrinsic at the heart of all the major religions. That's something.
I just want to ask a point of clarification. Something you said a minute ago. What's the difference between truth and ultimate truth? I don't follow.
Yeah, I don't see a distinction either. But
so I will say this: I lucked out. I was on a study of, and this actually, Ozzy, this was where the joke comes from. Where I was talking about, I had said in the Trump piece that he was perhaps smoking medical grade hallucinogens, and actually that was referring to ketamine, which has now been approved. Actually, I think just last month by the FDA for the treatment of severe depression, bipolar type 2, a few other things. I was actually on a study trying it, so I got to under the care of a doctor, have all the ketamine I wanted, and it completely legal, loads of fun. Now I will tell you, I found lots of truth through that. And then the next day I would take a look at my notes and say, I can't decipher any of these things. And I think people, smoke marijuana, same thing happens. And, I would have absolutely no trouble with the notion that it changes your way of thinking in such a way, it opens up your mind. I'm not well, yeah, maybe it can open it up so much your brains fall out, I suppose. But it changes it, and you might get a new perspective on a certain problem, and I can see how people could use it creatively. But I don't see, in my own experience or in the experience of anyone I've talked to, whether it was medical or recreational or anything like that, using any of these hallucinogens, where they say that it actually provided them with knowledge that they did not already have. And I think that would be the problem.
We got to start wrapping this up. So hang on, I got to move on here. Sokka's got his hand up, and I got a super chat, and then we do got to end this because it's getting late for where Ozzy's at. Sokka, you had something you want to add?
Yeah. So the studies that he's referencing, like the last time that I spoke with Cafe here, like I looked into some of the stuff he was saying, and there's a couple things wrong with the way that he's kind of representing these studies. One of the first things he said is that the researchers are going out and they're associating the experiments that they're doing now with the type of spiritual experiences that people had through the ages. But there's no real way to really distinguish what these people are calling spiritual events nowadays, and whether or not these are similar or the same type of spiritual events that people have had throughout the ages. We have no records or no way to actually verify anything like that. But
I can tell you how they do that.
but the main point that they have here is that a lot of this is based off of the people, like you were saying here, is that whether or not if we're going to go and follow this back to things like stoned ape theory, that these drugs can give us the illusion of increasing our perception of the world around us. It's not actually doing that. You're not seeing things clearer. You're not seeing things more accurate or anything like that. What you are having is an illusion of perception. You feel like you see the world in such a way. You feel like you're getting these hidden details, but it's not really expanding your mind or anything. It's giving you the illusion that you're getting this, because there's no correlation that's been found between the experience that you're having of this increased perception of the world around you and actually having some type of increased physical acuity of the actual substance of the world around you.
That's why I look at it too. I think it just changes your filter, right? I mean, I don't think there's any way to actually determine what objective reality would even be, but we have perception filters, and what those drugs do is they change your perception filters. It doesn't give you a glimpse of what actual naive realism would be or whatever. The real, I'm going to put it in your vernacular, your absolute truth. It doesn't give us any glimpse of that. We'd have no idea if it did or didn't anyways. There'd be no way to tell. But I think these drugs just alter our perception filters, and we live our lives such that the brain has conditioned ourselves to think that this is what we see as reality. It probably isn't. It probably is something completely different, I think. But this is what we've grown to be normative for us. But even between different people, we see things differently, right? Even the visual things for colors, people see differently. We have different sensations that we feel differently, and we can't ever validate.
I think you're kind of undermining it a bit, though, because I think you're a bit undermining it, because I mean, in the most recent study, they've had atheist volunteers, and we're talking about like not just a temporal perceptual change. We're talking about a drastic, a quantum change in perception, where you're not the same person ever afterwards. Even some of the atheists that have volunteered no longer identify with atheism, after this event. So I don't think it's something that you could just brush off like that.
Well, Kathy, the thing is when we were in a chat not too long ago, you shared a study with us, and then I think it was me and Saka, and I think Dragnaut was there. And we read the study while we were in the hangout together, and the conclusions you were drawing were not anywhere near the same conclusions that the scientists that did the study came to in the paper. I mean, so I think you're adding a lot to.
Are which one in particular? I as far as I'm concerned, I don't see that I'm saying anything different than what's been demonstrated. The evidence they've been able to produce after decades of research.
Well, maybe Saka can speak up, because I know he saw that study, and as far as I knew, everybody else in the hangout was trying to explain to you that you were drawing conclusions that were not drawn by the people that ran.
I can link you guys. I just wanted to ask Nick real quick. I don't want to like Steve said, he has to wrap it up. That's all I wanted to add. I mean, if that's cool. Unless you guys don't mind.
If you take enough of those things, they can cause permanent brain damage. And there are people who have, even with one hit of LSD, who have had radical personality changes. It's rare, but it happens, and that's powerful stuff. And
in the studies, in each one of these studies have been happening. The changes have been happening in the majority of volunteers. In each one of these studies, they've had that track record since study one. With healthy volunteers that was part of the pilot study. So I mean, if you don't mind, I would send you the links that I recommend looking into it yourself, and instead of trying to make a quick judgment about it.
I put my Twitter information in the live chat, and I'll be happy to look at it. So it's you can
cool, awesome. I appreciate it.
Twitter.
All right, so let me read the super chat by Veleth 1337. Leet, thank you. I think that's what 1337 is Leet, right? It says, Steve, when you're hallucinating in these drugs, are these beings are these beings you come in contact real because their reality is relative to what you experienced at that point in time? No, they have. I don't believe they have any ontology whatsoever, right? I mean, I think they're totally internalized. Now there are I think there's 4 different ways you can look at some of these drug trips, and I don't remember the exact names of them. One of them was the perennialism that he was mentioning. Perennialism is that there's some kind of ontology to these beings, and another one was called, and I have looked into what he was talking about before. But I think the other one's a concretism or something. I can't remember the 4th one, where they do exist, right? They're independent, like the mechanical elves or the jesters, they're called, have some kind of ontology. I don't believe that at all. I don't think the perennialism approach makes sense to me. But Ozzy, I mean, do you have anything you want to add on that before we end this?
Yeah, the difficulty I have with this idea of a perennial philosophy is that it claims that all of these world religions, however different they are, they're all sort of different ways of, they're all different understandings of one fundamental truth. And I think that's a pipe dream. Just don't think that's true. I think that there's no good reason to think that all these religions are ultimately saying the wrong thing. That what's true in Hinduism is the same truth that's true in Judaism, which is true in Islam, which is true in, Scientology, or heaven knows what you will want to come up with. I don't think that that's correct. That seems to me to be trying to salvage something out of religion, right? That's sort of looking at the multiplicity and variety of religious claims that violently disagree with one another and say, well, ignore all of this diversity and disagreement, and let's just imagine that there's one core truth that they're all actually zeroing in on, but they're all expressing it differently. That these are all manifestations of some fundamental insight. I don't think that's true, and I don't think there's an argument to be made for that.
Yep. Okay, well, we're gonna wrap this up. Like I said, I'm gonna be trying something different next time, where we can basically do it with OBS and people can call in next time these two gentlemen are available. Anything you want to leave us with before I wrap it up? Because I'm gonna tell a dumb joke, and then we can all go home for the night.
I have one little thing.
Go for it.
If you are on, or were on Google Plus, on G Plus, and as you know, that's gone now. There's another platform that a lot of us have migrated to. It's called MeWe. Check it out. It's kind of like a cross between Facebook and G Plus. It has a lot of functionality of both platforms, and it's ad-free and spyware-free. So do check it out. I'm there, and a lot of people are there. Steve is there. The great debate community is there. I don't know if there's going to be a non sequitur page, or if there is a non sequitur page there already, but it probably will be at some point.
MEWE.
Yeah.
MEWE.com.
Yeah. If you go to MeWe and look up Great Debate Community, you can find us on MeWe as well. There's some people are starting to come over there, but yeah, definitely add me on MeWe. I'll start putting MeWe links in the video descriptions from here on out. Okay. And Nick, you got anything?
You gonna
I'm
hold
good
for a minute?
Yeah, I'll be in it for a second. So Ozzy, I got a joke for you. Ready? And I kind of made it up, but even it's kind of derivative, like all jokes. But what's the difference between a philosophy major or philosophy degree and a jockstrap? A jockstrap can be used to support yourself.
Okay, now you have to let me do mine. You have to let me do mine. What did the some of you may have heard this one. What did the employed philosophy major say to the unemployed philosophy major?
Would you like fries with that?